James Robinson is expected to be the top running back on the depth chart for the Jaguars. What's that mean for your Travis Etienne shares, and what's that mean for your Dynasty rosters? All that more today. I'm your host, Adam Wilde. This is the Dynasty newsletter with Footballguys.com, joined today by Chris Allen. Chris, what do you think about James Robinson?
I think most of us like James Robinson after the 2020 season. UDFA, one of the best seasons that we could expect out of an undrafted free agent. So when you're evaluating James Robinson, like moving forward, I think we all had to take a look at the draft capital they wound up spending on ETN, the current situation that we find ourselves looking at the Jaguars, like just complete offense, like from the coaching staff all the way down to the new quarterback who already has an established connection with ETN. So, I mean, it makes sense for us to devalue Robinson, like in his current state. But we have to look at what he was capable of producing like last season. I mean, none of that production like really goes away. I mean, his ability to create in bad situations, like you can't just like discount that.
Right.
So I think moving forward, I mean, he's a guy that we know is probably going to wind up losing value like over the next like season or two because he can easily get phased out of that offense. But can he be one of those guys that within the next couple of seasons, can we see him getting moved to a different team that could wind up having a backfield that might have a need for a guy like James Robinson? Could the Cardinals wind up scooping him up with next year or two on a fairly cheap contract, given the fact that there's literally zero draft capital spent on him to get into the league to begin with. So I can definitely see a situation where he holds some minimal value to the Jaguars for this season, maybe next season, something like that. But then afterwards, he can wind up moving to another team that could wind up needing a capable back. I mean, looking at his production from last season, not even just the production. Let's take that, completely throw that out. I mean, the results are great, and everybody loved his fantasy points per game and all that. But look at the opportunity, that workload that he was capable of handling. I mean, like 85% of like the team's rushing attempts. He was rocking, I think, like a 13.5% target share. I mean, this is a every down back. I mean, that is what we would want for our running backs. So at least for most folks that wound up feeling like they're holding the bag, I don't think it's not a situation where I'm trying to, if I have him on my roster, trying to just sell for peanuts at this point.
Sure.
We can still see a path to him at least having some opportunity within the Jaguars offense in year one under Urban Meyer and with Trevor Lawrence and all the rest of the cats that they've added. So we can see opportunity for him, although albeit reduced in year one. After that, I mean, again, like the path I just laid out, can he be let go and go to another, like a decent situation for a team that needs a running back? I can definitely see that in the cards. I mean, could he be the guy that winds up backing up or playing alongside like Austin Eckler in a couple of years after they don't like, you can tell that they're just kind of soured on Justin Jackson. We don't know if Joshua Kelly is actually going to be a part. And even the running back they drafted this season, was it Roundtree, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, Larry Roundtree.
Yeah, I mean, he could also be a guy that comes in if that guy also winds up floundering as well. I mean, so I think there are paths to James Robinson like coming back into our good graces from a fantasy perspective. So he is just one of those guys that you just have to kind of wait and see. But I don't think that we should completely shut the door on James Robinson as of right now.
Yeah, he was the definition of a hold after last year, having been so productive and so efficient and basically broke every preconceived notion that we had about the running back position. Terrible offense, terrible team, no reason whatsoever to be a productive back, undrafted. And then, of course, we got Ryquell Armstead with the very, very serious COVID situation that boosted James Robinson into the limelight. And he couldn't have possibly done any better. Now, he didn't pass the litmus test this year where he scaved off a early round running back just because he produced so well as an undrafted guy. He gets Travis Etienne. So what does this mean for Travis Etienne, especially the people that drafted him this year? And now they're saying, wait a second, I drafted an incredible running back in Travis Etienne, very productive at Clemson, and now you're telling me James Robinson's going to be the starter? So let's hit the quote. Jacksonville Jaguars running back James Robinson is expected to be the top running back on the depth chart, according to John Shipley, SI.com. So I'm just I'm expecting him to be the early down back essentially. I mean, not
Mhm.
only do you have Travis Etienne there to pick up a lot of the receiving work, but you also have Laviska Shenault that will operate in a lot of similar areas. So was it worth it to sell him for peanuts, as you said? No, absolutely not. In Dynasty, you
Yeah.
should have been holding. And I do want to step away from using the acquisition cost as a reason for holding. That's not a reason to hold. It doesn't matter what you acquired him for. Once he's on your roster, his value is his value. It changes next week. It changed last week. It is what it is. So we're not going to say, "Oh, I acquired him for a probably a fourth in Dynasty is what you were using to acquire James Robinson." Just
Yeah.
because you acquired him for a fourth doesn't mean you sell him for peanuts and call it a profit. It's not a profit. It's not a profit when he was operating as, I think, the RB4 on a per game basis last year, if
Right.
I'm not mistaken. So why are you selling for peanuts when we don't know anything about Urban Meyer in the NFL? I'm starting to lean more towards I don't trust anything out of his mouth so far. We'll
Yeah.
see this season, but I'm none of it's adding up. The pick's not adding up. The Travis Etienne pick is not quite adding up. Bringing in Carlos Hyde, not quite adding up. So I would not deter myself from drafting Travis Etienne because of the situation. Situations change quickly for running backs. Unfortunately, running backs only give you a good 4 years of comfortable elite production. So this might muddy up one of them, the first one.
Mhm.
Um, but I don't know that. Here's what this did for me. I had Najee Harris in his own tier, Travis Etienne basically in his own tier, Javonte Williams in his own tier. So when there's no one else in the tiers, that's just me saying I feel really good about Najee Harris, pretty good about Travis Etienne, and
Mhm.
and okay about Javonte Williams. This just pushes, like, I feel like Travis Etienne and Javonte Williams are in their own tier right now, and they're both in similar situations. At least Travis Etienne has Trevor Lawrence for the foreseeable future. No
Right.
idea what Javonte Williams has. And the running back position is all about offensive productivity. So I feel a lot better about Trevor. Hey, that Jacksonville Jaguars offense has actually got a lot of upside. If we can get DJ Chark from 2 years ago and not last year, which who was throwing him the ball last year? Okay. So,
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of uncatchable balls thrown DJ Chark's way last year. So you get DJ Chark back to 2019 level. Laviska Shenault is the best looking player on the team, according to some reporters in their offseason program. And then you've added Travis Etienne. You know that James Robinson is, frankly, an incredible running back. And now you add Trevor Lawrence, like the whole. So if I'm investing in offenses, like I've been preaching this whole offseason, I'm invested in the Jacksonville Jaguars, right?
Oh yeah, I think that's the way that you should approach it. I mean, because if you look at it from even from a divisional standpoint, I mean they're playing against the Texans at least twice a year. We already know that that team's a dumpster fire. I
Great
mean the
point.
Colts, we don't know like what their offense is going to wind up looking like. Their defense, so. I mean, for the rest of their division, I mean, there's a shot coming right out the gate that they can wind up taking down their division, like even in year one of Trevor
Wow.
Lawrence and Urban Meyer. It's not, I mean, it's not a lock or anything like that, but I'm saying it's in the range of
Sure.
outcomes. Like we should at least like contemplate that as being a possibility for this Urban Meyer experience. But like flipping back to James Robinson, I mean, from a value perspective, I mean, who are we really trying to value him over at this point? I'm flipping through our dynasty rankings here at Footballguys, like from some of our staff members, from a non-rookie perspective, the guys that the guys that Robinson is currently valued behind. Chase Edmonds is a spot right ahead of him. Chris Carson is 2 spots ahead of him, and then Kareem Hunt. Like that's the range of guys that are currently ahead of him, and then right behind him, again, non-rookies, Myles Gaskin, Kenyon Drake, and Uncle Len. So it's like those are the
Mhm.
guys about the range, and from my perspective, looking at it, like while I can see Kareem Hunt like holding steady value, Chris Carson, okay, I can understand that like from a degree. I mean, he's tied to a great offense and
Mhm.
whatnot. I mean, but James Robinson is what 22, 23 years old.
Right.
I mean, coming off of a decent from a fairly elite opportunity profile.
Mhm.
But even if this year, if he winds up taking a backseat to Travis Etienne, like we expect due to Etienne's draft capital, I mean, we're going to be looking at a fairly young, let's say 23, 24-year-old. like at the end of next season. So it's almost like how we look at, let's say like James Conner. I mean, a guy that I was just mentioning, like regarding the Cardinals backfield. I mean, he didn't have like a ton of carries like coming into like his first like real season with the Steelers. So like while his age profile like might have looked like it might have been a ding on his ledger, it's just one of the ways that, I mean, but if you look at his carries in total, it's like, okay, fine. Like I can wind up adjusting for that production. Same thing with James Robinson, right? I mean, if we're not expecting 300 carries for him or 300 plus touches for him this season, and he winds up moving over to another team like in 22 or something like that, it's still a guy that won't have a ton of production on it, but we know that he still has the profile of a guy that can produce if given the opportunity. So I still say at best, he's a hold for right now. And if anything, I mean, if I'm probably looking at it from a more, I guess, rosy side of things, because honestly, he could wind up getting moved over to the Jets or something like that in a couple of seasons or whatever, and he's sitting behind Michael Carter, which actually might not be too terribly bad either. Sure. But it's just, you have to look at both sides of that. But I wouldn't say that James Robinson is a guy that we should just be completely out on yet again.
Man, we could go so far into the weeds with that, because it also could be a situation where this is one of the very, very rare, if not only, cases where it's good that his contract is only 3 years as an undrafted free agent, because he might be looking to a feature role. But I never invest in running backs when they're moving on, because you never know what you're going to get. So that's going to be a tough mind trick that we have to play with ourselves come the end of 2022 is James Robinson going to move on, and do we want to invest in him early? I would say the price is so low now. So like with Tevin Coleman, when Tevin Coleman was moving on from the Falcons, his price elevated substantially. So it was an easy sell. James Robinson's price is probably just going to keep going down, actually. And even if we get our priors confirmed this season with James Robinson that Travis Etienne is doing work, then you've got an easy buy opportunity for a running back that's going to contribute either way, whether he's the 1A or the 1B, and then gets to move on after year 3, which is super rare for productive backs, because the only way you can do that is if you are a undrafted free agent and you sign whatever contract you want. So it's a pretty rare circumstance. But we talked about Trevor Lawrence a little bit and the elevation of that offense. Let's talk about another rookie quarterback in Mac Jones. So the Patriots rookie quarterback Mac Jones has done enough in spring practices to push Cam Newton for the starting job in training camp. That's according to Albert Breer, SI.com. What do you think about Mac Jones actually taking the reins before the season even starts?
I don't know about all that. I'm struggling to believe that's, I mean, but that's me holding my priors on Cam Newton.
Me too.
That's mostly me. So I will 100% like throw that out there, like right off the rip. That's more of me still rooting for Cam Newton, me still thinking that it's because of the COVID fog. Remember that they talked about, like after you got hit with that, like towards the
Lamar Jackson too, man.
Yeah, so that might be part of it. I think
it's real.
Yeah, I think it is real too. But we do have to factor in, I mean, Cam Newton's not old for a quarterback, but just with the injuries that have compiled over the years, I mean, so on and so forth, that it could be like we're getting close to the end. But regardless, I do find it difficult to believe that Mac Jones is going to wind up completely taking over like prior to week 1. I do think at best, I mean, Bill Belichick is going to give Cam Newton the best chance in order to open the season as the starter. They wind up using him for, I would say, like the first like 5 to 6 weeks. I'm trying to remember like when is the Patriots like bye week in
week 14.
Yeah, so week 4. So they do have a later bye. So I don't think it's going to be one of those like, what was it like with Miami and Tua like last season, where it was just like Ryan Fitz throughout most of the season, and then after they had their bye week, which was towards the middle of the fantasy season, if I'm remembering correctly, and then they flipped it over to Tua afterwards. I don't think it's going to be one of those situations. It's going to be more like if Cam can't do his job, then here comes Mac Jones.
Sure,
and I'm pretty sure that's, and knowing and just
might even flop back too.
Yeah, but just understanding the coach that they play for, it really is about being capable of doing your job. Like, can Cam Newton do the job? Given the fact that they have like returning starting linemen, I mean, they've added, let's say, quote unquote weapons. I mean, Nelson Aguilar, whatever you think about Nelson Aguilar and the guys that they've added so far. I mean, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, like so on and so forth. But it's just, can you do the job? And if Cam Newton can execute, like, Cam will remain the starter. Now, if he can't because of the injuries and whatnot, we can see Mac Jones like coming in to start. So it's nothing against Mac Jones's ability. I mean, I have like no takes on Mac Jones, like as an NFL prospect, at least no negative takes. Rather, I mean, I was all in on following guys like Ray G, like when they were talking about him and just looking at his prospect evaluation, Matt Waldman, Mark Schofield, like so on and so forth. Like I understand like what the traits are, and he does fit well within the Patriot system. But hearing this stuff about him pushing for Cam as a starter, to me that feels more like a fluff piece. Just
Sure.
reading between the lines, because with the way that Bill Belichick himself has talked about Cam Newton, the fact that they still wound up bringing him back after what all of us from the fantasy community assumed to be a down season for Cam, or like a disaster of a season for Cam Newton. It's hard for me to believe that they would have still brought Cam Newton back without having a plan for him to at least start this season and play, I would say, a decent amount of games from a fantasy perspective. I mean, by decent, I mean at least 4 to 6 games. And then they transition over to Mac Jones afterwards.
So I remember having the conversation with you when Cam got signed that this has to be good news for Cam Newton's recovery. I feel like it was a very mutualistic deal. It was one where the Patriots didn't know that Mac Jones would quite fall to him, and they had to have known that Cam Newton is getting better. Whether it was COVID fog last year. Look, Myles Garrett said that he struggled immensely with it. There is not a more chiseled human on this planet than
Oh my
Myles
gosh,
Garrett.
that dude's arms are ridiculous.
Right. And so if he's going to, Cam Newton probably did. And Cam Newton's up there too with some of the most chiseled dudes I've seen. So
Yeah.
they're struggling, man. I mean, it was real for them. So it's hard to figure out what to throw away from last year. So, but one thing to consider is that the offenses are going to have to be dramatically different with Cam Newton or Mac Jones under center. So if you're thinking about making the switch, maybe you lean one way or the other. Maybe you lean into keeping Cam Newton for the season, or you lean into starting Mac Jones early, because you don't want to have – look, the Patriots are going to be a playoff contender every year. That's just – Bill Belichick is not going to rebuild ever, which is why he spent way too much for Nelson Aguilar. You like that I drafted so much Nelson Aguilar and T.Y. Hilton that I know they share a Week 14 bye right off the top of my head.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because I've been drafting a lot of either like Ramondre Stevenson, Damian Harris, like whomever in Best Ball Mania.
Loving Damian Harris. But so if he's going to add those weapons, he's got there's a plan, and if the plan probably doesn't involve Mac Jones quite yet, to be quite honest, because they didn't even know that they were going to draft him when some of these acquisitions were made. And you brought it. I mean, this sounds like a Cam Newton offense to me. You brought in a field stretcher, and then you brought in 2 tight ends, 2 very productive receiving tight ends. So I feel like you're probably right. It's a fluff piece, but who does this really benefit? And put in this piece out there. I guess you always want to give your rookie confidence, but
I was gonna say it benefits Mac Jones.
It does benefit Mac Jones, but how does it benefit Cam Newton going into win the playoffs this year? So I mean, before the drum beats started, and I will admit that the drum beats are starting with Mac Jones, I was thinking Cam Newton was a good investment in Dynasty, because I felt like he was going to get a full crack at this season without, all the COVID distractions and then actually having COVID and another year because he barely really had to use his arm last year, to be quite honest with you. He was mostly productive on the ground and in short yardage situations. So he had basically 2 years to rest that shoulder that he had the surgery on. I feel like the plan is to go with Cam Newton for the whole year. And if that's the case, depending on how cheaply you can acquire him in Dynasty, you hit the nail on the head. He's not old for a quarterback. He may be injured, but if you're going to say that it's signaling that the Patriots are comfortable with his injury resume, thinking he's probably better now, why would they have paid him again and paid him more than last year? Now, granted, just a 1 year, they weren't going to give him, because they still had the outside shot of a rookie quarterback. They weren't going to give him a big contract, but they did give him another 1 year, and they did give him more money than last year.
Right.
So you can go down 2 avenues here, but one avenue says if he was healthy enough to get that contract for this year and he's in the plans and they kind of grabbed him some help, then he lands on another team next year and is a starting quarterback.
Yeah, and I know folks the reaction to us discussing Cam Newton in a positive light would be that, well, they might not have anticipated Mac Jones falling to where he
Sure.
did in the draft. So any plans that they might have had for Cam Newton completely went out the window the moment they drafted Mac Jones. And that is an absolute possibility. I mean, I know we're speaking out of both sides of our mouth like with this, but we have to entertain the possibility that the moment Mac Jones became available, without them having to spend a top 3 pick in order to do that, with all of the rumors of Mac Jones to SF, then that's entirely possible. But again, with the things that we've actually heard Bill Belichick say within the past couple of weeks about Cam Newton, that conflicts with that mindset, at least in my mind.
Right. All right, I'm with you. So we're talking about another person on a 1-year deal here. So the Chicago Bears' Allen Robinson said he's open to playing on the 1-year franchise tag this season. He said there is no news regarding a long-term contract with the Bears, according to Jeff Dickerson of ESPN.com. That means to me good news for people that have invested in Allen Robinson. There's not going to be a holdout, but it means he's probably going somewhere else next year. What do you think of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it sounds to me. And in my mind, that makes the most sense to Allen Robinson from not just a financial, or not just from a not sports perspective, but like a fantasy football perspective. He wants to be able to see what the offense is going to look now under a more, let's say, stable quarterback, regardless of if it's going to be Andy Dalton or what we hope to be Justin Fields at some point during the season. I think for all of Andy Dalton's faults, we can say that at least for most of the time, he can at least be a functional quarterback, a slightly above replacement level quarterback. Now, once he is one of those quarterbacks that once he makes a single mistake, those mistakes compound like one after the other, and he completely melts down. But he's not erratic like we've seen with Mitchell Trubisky, like time after time after time. So I would say at least Andy Dalton is a slight step up from Mitch Trubisky, but then Justin Fields is obviously head and shoulders above both of those guys. But so from Allen Robinson's perspective, I can understand why he just wants to wait this out, see what Andy Dalton does, because they've already assumed that for the most part, he's going to wind up being the starter. And then once Justin Fields takes over, if the kid's the real deal, then it's like, okay, fine. I mean, we'll figure it out. But either way, with the cap situation bouncing up in 2022, more teams might have a little bit more money to spend at the wide receiver position. It's entirely possible that he winds up actually making more for his long-term, aka possibly his final deal to round out his career.
Probably.
He might wind up getting more for his, more bang for his buck next season anyway. So either way, I think it sounds like Allen Robinson might end up coming into a win-win situation, regardless of what happens if he stays in Chicago or moves on in 2022.
Yeah, I kind of look at it as playing with fire. There's really nothing Allen Robinson can do about it. It's been unfortunate how his career has panned out with the quarterback situation.
Yeah.
But it's kind of playing with fire at the age that he's going to be when he gets to finally hit, I get to pick the team I go to and really make bank, is going to be 28 years old, I believe. So that's when it starts to get
almost 29, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So that's when it starts getting tough for wide receivers. Now, T.Y. Hilton did get a 1-year, $10 million deal. So it's not out of the realm of possibility for him to quote unquote get the bag. But the unfortunate part about it, and the part that where you're kind of playing with fire, is that I believe Justin Fields is going to be a top 10 quarterback in this league. Maybe not right away. I don't think Andy Dalton can scathe him off very long. And once Justin Fields hits the ground running, that if you want to play with a good quarterback, you're going to land with who I believe will be a top 10 quarterback if you stay with the Bears. And at that point, they're going to have the leverage, because do you want to play with Justin Fields, who maybe balled out in 2021, or do you want to maybe land with the 2020 or 22 other teams that don't have top 10 quarterbacks? That's kind of playing with fire there. It's almost like, but they didn't. Allen Robinson has said all along, they're not really offering him deals, So what's he going to do? So it's going to be tough for him if Justin Fields balls out this year and he decides, you know what, I want to stay. I like it here in Chicago. We never consider that with the players, where they actually just like where they live, or they like the taxes where they live. There's other reasons he might want to stay where he's at. So we could see him land something long term, but he's probably going to have to take a little bit of a discount, which is unfortunate for him if he wants to play with Justin Fields. Now, I mean, Justin Fields could struggle out the gate as some rookie quarterbacks do, and then it really doesn't matter. We're probably just going to see Allen Robinson go somewhere else, maybe just take the highest bidder, could land with the Texans, something like that. And then, but it's hard to invest in him right now. And this is exactly why Allen Robinson has never gotten outside of that 14 touchdown, 1,400 yards year, and I think 80 receptions, something like that. With the Jaguars, he's never really gotten up to like the top 10, top 15 at wide receiver, even though he's producing like it, because we can never predict a year out for him. You can't predict what quarterback he's going to play with. You can't predict what contract he's going to have. So you don't really have an investment opportunity here because he's going to be probably a top 10, top 15 wide receiver this year. So people aren't going to sell him for cheap. And if you do go acquire him, you might end up with, like I said, a Houston Texans playing with Pat Mills or something like that.
Right. Yeah. But I know one thing that we can count on for Allen Robinson is that once he does wind up shifting teams, if he decides to leave, he is one of those guys that has earned his target share. Right. It's not like I know I don't know if you've seen like the current debate on Twitter, not debate rather, but just the sense that Kenny Golladay moving to the Giants isn't like this massive deal for Golladay because he's a quote unquote like fake alpha, because he's only garnered a 20 to 21% target share within his own offense with Detroit. That has not been the case with Allen Robinson though, right? Like he has been a true alpha, like within his own offense, regardless of where he's been at, like 25, 26% target share, like for the most part. And then when guys have gone down, that's kicked up, right? He's gone like, DeAndre Hopkins like level, like amount of targets, like when their injuries have occurred. So wherever he winds up going, I don't think it's going to wind up being the sense of, well, he's going to be fighting for targets, and any of that other stuff. So I think he can still at least have the opportunity of a wide receiver one within whichever offense he winds up landing in. It's just, where does he wind up? Like you just mentioned, like what are the range of outcomes that could possibly happen for a guy like him? Can he wind up in a bad situation, like winding up in Houston? Yes. Could he winding up in a good situation, like if he were to wind up replacing a guy like Robert Woods, who there was rumors of Woods being on the trade block for LA just a few months ago? Like could Allen, but of course the Rams, since they're continually strapped for cash, I don't think they could ever pay for a guy like Robinson. But still, I mean, it's in the realm of possibility, because a lot of folks say the cap isn't real anyway.
Sure. So we talked about COVID fog a little bit earlier. We've got a doozy next year, but before we get to that, let me just remind everybody to please go check out footballguys.com. Go ahead and subscribe. Look, we're out here pumping a lot of content. We have a lot of content coming out on the YouTube channel. We're going to have shows 7 days a week. So go ahead over to the YouTube channel, subscribe to Football Guys YouTube channel. Please click the notification bell so you know when those shows are starting. Some days we're going to have multiple, so make sure you're getting those notifications so you don't miss a show. And let us do the work. You do the winning. Somebody who might not be winning because he might retire. Buffalo Bills wide receiver Cole Beasley said Saturday that he may consider retirement over his disagreement with the league's continuing COVID-19 protocols for unvaccinated players, according to Cody Benjamin, CBS Sports. Chris, I see your reaction over there. What are we doing? I mean, look, man, I just have to say, like, Cole Beasley is a viable fantasy option. So, like, unfortunately, we kind of have to care. Not like a great option, but, people are out here talking about him being, droppable and such. I don't know. He got quite a few targets in a high-powered offense last year. What are we doing with Cole Beasley?
I don't know how to separate out the two. I'm going to keep it relatively, PC, and just say that if you ever want to go look at a classic case of somebody quote unquote tweeting through it, go look at his timeline, because that is what he did. He was tweeting through it. But you are absolutely right, Adam. That's how we need to view his opportunity moving forward, regardless of the fact that he's 29 at this point.
He's up there, but he's under contract.
Right, he is under contract, so that's the risk. No, actually, I just looked it up. He's 32. But regardless, that's the risk profile that he's now associated with. Like you mentioned, Buffalo Bills, top 3 in terms of neutral passing rate, top 5 in terms of offensive yards per drive. I mean, to all the efficiency stats, like for an offense, like you want to have a pass catcher attached to that type of offense. So yes, we would want that type of guy. And he also works in the slot, like primarily. So even more, like even better,
Right.
like we want the guy that are getting some of those like high value touches, like so on and so forth. But when statements like this come out, regardless of your political affiliations or how you feel about, like, if you're pro or against, like what he's talking about, that does have to factor into our fantasy analysis.
It's
Because
crazy, but yes.
if he winds up on the commissioner's exempt list, he winds up missing games because he comes into contact with some folks. I mean, that is a actual thing. Like we now have to project that into his range of outcomes, along with some of the other players, because that's the one that is one team I know of that has been in the news like quite frequently over the past month to 6 weeks, when most of those protocols have been hammered out like by the league, that they've said that they need to think about it more. They're having conversations and all this other stuff. It's not like Bruce Arians and the Buccaneers, where it's just like, yeah, I'm the, like BA saying like, I'm the expert, you're getting vaccinated, so things can go back to normal. Like it's not like that. It's been more of this type of stuff, like coming from the fellas out of Buffalo. And again, regardless of how you feel about the situation, you do now need to project the possibility of guys like him missing games. And so from a dynasty perspective, if you're already more or less like 1 foot out the door with Beasley, just because of he's 32, and because of his age and whatnot, okay, fine. If this is your kind of push to kind of move him to another team, because he should still have value, right? Like overall, without any of this other stuff, between him and Emmanuel Sanders, those guys still hold value because of the offense that they play in and also the routes that they run. I know a lot of folks after like Emmanuel Sanders like came over to the team, we even almost completely stopped talking about Gabe Davis.
Yep.
For all intents and purposes, after what Gabe Davis did in his rookie season, we're all talking about Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders. So it's just those guys still have value, but now because of that decision, if you are like holding on to a guy like Beasley, like on your roster, why not see if other folks within your league, not trade for, like try and offer him straight up, but just see if you can wind up working a way to get out from under him, just because of the fact that we might wind up losing him for a couple of games this season. It's entirely within the range of outcomes.
Or he just retires entirely. So
yeah.
So if you're a contender and you have your 3rd round pick, so it's going to be late. You're making the playoffs, and you get an offer for Cole Beasley. Are you sending your 3rd for Cole Beasley?
Possibly. I could see myself doing that, just assuming the risk. And if a guy, again, if we're trying to think about this objectively, then a guy like Cole Beasley would be a guy that you can wind up using if you're trying to push for a win this year. So I could see that.
Okay. Another one, Cole Beasley or Keelan Cole.
Cole Beasley, I think fairly easily. I know that the hype right now for Cole is, like, we're hearing it, it's legit, but I'm still, he would still most likely be the 3rd target on that team. I'm still thinking Elijah Moore. It's Elijah Moore, Jamison Crowder, and Corey Davis ahead of Keelan Cole. And we haven't even talked about Michael Carter yet. So,
or Denzel Mims. Can't completely count him out yet.
I know, but I'm more on the logic regarding Mims that he just doesn't fit that offense. So I can understand like why who's the Denzel Mims equivalent in San Francisco? Kendrick Bourne?
Nah,
they don't exist. And there's a reason why they don't exist, because they don't fit that scheme that they're running there. So I can understand like why Mims can possibly get completely left out of the rotation there.
Yeah, I fully understand that Mims doesn't fit, and it does all make sense, but I'm just in the mindset that Mims is going to have a word, he's going to have something to say about that too.
I'm hoping, but hopefully what he says is, it's not him being vocal about it. It shows in his actions and shows in his ability to evolve as a wide receiver, instead of being a contested catch like Mike Williams guy. He tries to turn himself into a guy that can actually do something after the catch.
Sure.
because that is what the Shanahan offense is predicated on. So unless he can try and turn himself into, Ayuk, Debo Samuel, and you just kind of have that natural ability to be able to move like with the ball, or maybe if they try and use part of his speed on like jet sweeps or something like that, so add some utility to the offense. But unless you're just the, go route, fade,
Right.
that sort of guy, then we don't see a ton of use for that in an offense that we're assuming is going to be like what they've done or they continue to do in San Francisco.
I just feel he was highly productive, and then he had a decent rookie year. He had some injury, but I mean, Denzel Mims looked like what he was drafted for last season. And yes, he was drafted for an Adam Gase offense, but I feel like he's going to have something. I mean, it should not be too terribly difficult to pass Keelan Cole in the depth chart, and it shouldn't be too terrible for Elijah Moore to be the viable slot option, and Denzel Mims gets to play outside. I mean, Elijah Moore is going to play outside or inside. He's going to be on the field regardless of what has to happen. So if Elijah Moore is looking like he can beat out Jamison Crowder in the slot, Denzel Mims can beat out Keelan Cole on the outside, and then Denzel Mims essentially got left for dead. And not to mention, wide receivers take a while anyways. I mean, if you invest in him now, his second team, he could be incredible. I mean, if he goes to fit the right system, say Chiefs pick him up or something like that based on draft capital a few years ago. And then, teams know this. Teams are going to chalk it up to he didn't fit basically the 49ers offense, even though it's the Jets. And he could be incredible. So maybe he's some guy that you just stash at the bottom of your roster, and you probably just wait a little more into this year and let Denzel Mims not play for a while, and then you acquire him. And just keep in the back of your head that he's not playing to no fault of his own, allegedly. And remember that he's fairly good at what he does, and they just don't want him to do that with the Jets.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Did the flags in Ruggs' profile wind up pointing us to? Because I'm trying to think of other like first round busts, like the Kevin Whites of the world and all that. Not to say like Mims is a bust, but it's just are there flags that would make us look back on Mims as a prospect to say like we understand like why he's just not firing, or if it's just a scheme fit thing, then that is more of a okay, I can kind of understand. It's not necessarily his fault. It's more of just he doesn't fit within that offense. Or does he wind up being like Brashad Perryman, like where he gets drafted he goes to the Ravens, but the Ravens, they're not trying to chuck the ball deep. And that's what Perryman like could have been used for.
Right.
So it's just, and he doesn't fit within the offense. So then he bounces around to like, the Bucs, and now he's in Detroit. Could that be Mims coming up? Like, could that be, could it be what Mims's path moving forward is? Unless, because if the Chiefs wind up completely giving up on Mecole Hardman, let's say, after this season or in the next couple of seasons, could they wind up making a move to move for a guy like Mims? Entirely possible. That's the range of outcomes, right? He could wind up being a deep threat for, again, since you brought him up earlier, he could wind up being the deep threat for the Texans. Or he could wind up being the deep threat for the Chiefs at some point, like after he leaves New York.
That's very true. But we have a few easy case studies. So first, you mentioned a lot of the first round busts we see are those really, really, really fast guys that just don't
John
pan
Ross
out as receivers. So your John Ross and your Henry Ruggs. I believe Kevin White was also extremely fast. That was unfortunate with injuries. I was extremely excited for him.
Yeah.
But with Denzel Mims, I think of it more like I think of N'Keal Harry, in that he just he hasn't fit, and Harry's another person. So we have a case study. If you try to go acquire Harry right now, or if you go try to acquire Paris Campbell to an extent, except for he wasn't a first rounder, it's extremely easy. I went to MFL to go offer for N'Keal Harry in every league that I didn't have him, and I had him in every league already except for one. So it's not difficult to acquire him and catch on to a second team, and maybe you find out there was a reason that he was drafted in the first round. You could also have a Perriman situation or a Josh Doxson situation. Look at that deep
Oh
dive,
yeah,
or
yeah,
Laquan
yeah.
Treadwell. So it's not always
Mhm.
going to work out. But acquisition cost right now is like a third on a guy like Harry. And if Denzel Mims rides the bench all year, probably going to end up being a third for him too. So you
Right,
throw in your third at these guys who didn't land in the right system, but were first round picks. And as soon as when these NFL teams are doing these free agency reports, they have the people working on those.
right.
When it comes time to do those, they're saying, look, this guy was a first round talent. We had him graded such and such 4 years ago, and he just didn't fit their system. Boom, that guy gets another chance right there. It's almost like career redemption, and you throw a third at him, the same third we were talking about for Cole Beasley. You can
Right.
throw for Harry. You could throw for Mims soon if it doesn't pan out well for him. Those are all things that you can look ahead and just forget you roster them until, oh, hey, Harry's
Mhm.
crushing it. I'm glad that
Yeah.
I did that.
No, I think it's possible. It's just I do think, is it possible that we're getting out ahead of the scheme fit thing? Yes.
Mhm.
Is it possible that Mims is still a decent to good receiver? Also, yes.
Mhm.
And can he just wind up finding some success within an offense like this year? Absolutely possible. We still think that he's going to wind up at least playing a decent amount of snaps like this season. Can he wind up clicking with Zach Wilson? I mean, all those things are still within the realm of
Sure.
possibility. So I don't think we should be completely out on him. I mean, obviously the OTAs report and all that is kind of damning, but I think we should still have at least some positive outlook. It's only his second season, first round draft
Mhm.
capital. I mean, it could wind up working out. I think that's still within the realm of possibility for him.
And speaking of another first round wide receiver last year that maybe we're too early to call a bust, I'm not sure yet. Las Vegas Raiders wide receiver Henry Ruggs looks much better than he did last season, and head coach John Gruden indicated Wednesday that he will be more involved in 2021, according to Vic Tafur, The Atlantic. I mean, do you want to take John Gruden for his word? Because he also said Josh Jacobs was going to be more involved in the pass game. So, taking anything from this?
I mean, but he only had 43 targets like last season.
Fair.
So it's not like, am I assuming he's going to wind up with 143 targets this year? Probably not. But
John
even
Brown
if,
might.
yeah, it's entirely possible that Smokey might. I mean, Smokey forever, man. But is it possible that I would expect that he winds up having, I mean, 80 targets like should not be,
This
I
should
mean,
be his floor. Like, what are
that
we doing
we
here?
we would expect that to be his floor, but it's also how he's going to wind up being used like within that offense. Like, is he
Mhm.
going to be running a much more diverse route tree? Is he going to be utilized like still within the red zone as well? I mean, those are the questions that I have. I mean, you remove Nelson Aguilar like from that offense, you replace him with John Brown, so possibly same in terms of the
Pretty
quality
much,
of wide receiver
probably.
that you have right there. But if you wind up actually using him similar to how he was used, like when he was in back in college, I
Mhm.
think there is where you can actually utilize like more of his strengths. But we never saw any of that like in the first season. So it's a combination of two things. Like, is he going to get more opportunity within his offense? So more than 43 targets. I'm not talking about like 44, 45. We're talking about like 80 plus targets, a
Right,
minimum. I mean, as a wide
right.
receiver within that offense, like with a lack of competition, I would assume, is that going to happen? One, and also two, how is he going to be used? Is he going to be just used as that perimeter, like a perimeter wide receiver that just typically uses his speed in order to get open? If Derek Carr happens to lob it up there for him, then okay, fine. Or is he going to be used more to his strengths than what we saw out of his collegiate tape? Like, those are the two things that are on my mind. And if those two things actually come to fruition, then yes, we will get what we expected out of a first round wide receiver. If not, then I mean, just completely forget about it. And then it's almost like going back to the Mims conversation.
Mhm.
Like, if you're not going to use them to their strengths, then what are we doing here, folks? I mean, other than just
Sure,
like shoving empty targets like down our throats, and nobody wants that.
sure. And we're talking about Kenyon Drake getting snaps out of the slot. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah,
If you look on paper and you see Brian Edwards, Henry Ruggs, and John Brown, you have a decent receiver core plus Darren Waller.
yeah,
And then, okay, then you can talk about Brandon Jacobs and Kenyon Drake out of the backfield. But the point is, there should not be any reason. that Henry Ruggs should have competition for targets, except if he's just not good. And are you really in year 2, John Gruden, willing to admit, because basically giving him 43 targets, even though he missed like 2 games last year, had a little bit more that he played injured.
Right.
That's unacceptable. You and Mayock were like the same level on who has say in who gets drafted.
Yeah.
And you're going to tell so you're admitting by giving him 43 targets that you messed up? Like, you're really going to do that, John Gruden? So in year 2, if he doesn't get 80, at least 80 targets, then what were you doing? You need to John Gruden needs to come out and say, I messed up. Or Mayock, whoever was the deciding factor on that Ruggs pick and decided they had to have the fastest guy in the draft. They need to come out and say they messed up, because there's zero reason that Henry Ruggs should not have 80 to 100 targets in this offense. As much as both of us like John Brown, he should not be the wide receiver 1 in this offense when you just took Henry Ruggs as the first wide receiver off the board in a loaded draft class. And then I don't remember your take on Bryan Edwards, but I was a big fan of him. I mean, he seemed like everybody's favorite sleeper, which meant he was not a sleeper.
No. But I think Bryan Edwards, actually, he was the one that, at least in my mind, profiled more of what we would expect the alpha out of that offense to be. He had one of like the highest college dominator ratings, if I'm remembering correctly, like north of like 45%, if I'm remembering right. So like I think from a metrics perspective, the combination of Edwards and Ruggs, like coming into last season, I mean, that was what we expected, like for Derek Carr to at least maybe become more of a mediocre quarterback than one of the guys that we would just like casually throw a draft pick at, like towards the back end of startups. But instead of Ruggs and Edwards, we got Waller and Aguilar, which completely shifted the conversation about like what we expect like out of this Las Vegas offense. So Edwards is the one that's actually getting more of the attention like right now, like the picture of him like completely rocked up and whatnot, like back in training camp, like, and I get it. Right. And so like the hype is back on like for Edwards season, but still it comes back to how they're going to be deployed within that offense. Like if they're going to be used to their strengths, then cool, sign me up. But if it's just going to be the same old type of system that they tried out last year, then just give me Darren Waller and I don't care after that.
Sure. And Bryan Edwards is always going to be the favorite just because we as fantasy people want to be the smartest people in the room. So we don't want to say that the Raiders hit on their, taking the first wide receiver off the board last year. We want to say we knew that Bryan Edwards should have been a higher draft pick, and due to various circumstances, he was not. So people are always going to be excited about Bryan Edwards. And then when Henry Ruggs does something, they're going to be like, okay, well, he was supposed to do that. So Bryan Edwards is always going to be the more fun one. But either way, they could be solid at wide receiver for years. Just seems like that organization can never get it right. So speaking of alpha wide receivers, Baltimore Ravens wide receiver Sammy Watkins was the best receiver at the team's minicamp and has made several contested grabs, according to Jamison Hensley, ESPN.com. What are you thinking about Sammy Watkins' career resurgence with the Ravens?
I don't know about career resurgence, but at least from a fantasy perspective, I do think that for a guy that's bounced around to a number of teams, never really been able to latch on. I mean, we haven't really seen like the Sammy Watkins that we've expected, right? And for all intents and purposes, he's in the quote unquote like prime years like of a wide receiver.
Yeah, technically,
28, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, if you don't want to count all the injuries, yeah.
Right. So it's not like he's an old wide receiver like we were just talking about Cole Beasley or anything like that. So he still has a couple of years left to be athletic. We've seen him come out and actually have like productive stretches. I mean, while they're like relatively short stretches, like the playoff run, like with Patrick Mahomes and all that. But we can see that at least from an athletic standpoint, it's still there. It's just the injuries, like the injury risk that's associated with him. And that's always been a part of his profile. So like from a dynasty perspective, that risk is already baked into his value.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, you also have to factor in the landing spot. He goes from a top 3, like top 4, like neutral passing rate team
Like
to a
bottom three.
bottom 3, like neutral passing rate team.
Mhm.
But if they're efficient targets, which we can assume that from Lamar, like going from Lamar Jackson to Patrick Mahomes, at least from a deep ball perspective, isn't going to be that significant of a drop off. Then a guy like Sammy Watkins he still commands value. He still should be a valuable asset like on your roster. And in the case of, I mean, the draft picks that they've now added, Bateman, I think he immediately profiles as a guy that could quickly ascend to the wide receiver 1, like on that offense. Marquise Brown, like for all of his best strengths, we saw last year how they tried to make him an alpha with an offense. Didn't really work out that way. He can be more of a role player in that offense, and Sammy Watkins could be that 2A, like 2B, like if Marquise, between him and Marquise, like
Sure.
they could operate in that area. I mean, it's entirely possible that like Sammy Watkins can have a successful run to wrap up his career, like in Baltimore. And so I think he's definitely one of those guys that you should be having on the back end of your rosters at this point, for sure.
We're not giving the Ravens enough credit for having a fantastic wide receiver group for what they're doing
Yeah.
on offense. And so Willie Snead got 48 targets last year. I mean, Sammy
Mm-hmm.
Watkins is going to fill Willie Snead's role times 100. Like Sammy
Easy.
Watkins is going to be exactly what you wanted from Willie Snead. And in Willie Snead's defense, he was productive for the Ravens offense. They needed Willie Snead in those tough third down situations. And that's what Sammy Watkins is going to bring to you. But like times 100 ability when he's healthy, of course. And then not to mention you have Devin Duvernay if Sammy Watkins, has his inevitable injuries. And I also
Yeah.
believe that he fills a decent role there. I mean, if there was no Sammy Watkins, I'd still be reasonably excited. So you look at, and Bateman could be a complete alpha, and Hollywood needed a complete alpha. So these are all like things we're just not giving the Ravens credit for because they were bottom 3 in passing. But it sounds like that Lamar Jackson's going to play a little more under center this year. I just read an article from The Athletic. It was fantastic. I wish I remembered who wrote it, but I'm talking about why that will be more productive for the Ravens offense if Lamar Jackson adds a little bit under center. So everything's pointing up, but we only want to give Lamar Jackson credit. So Lamar Jackson's somehow still going to be a top 3 quarterback, but you're not going to give credit to Sammy Watkins, Bateman, Hollywood, Andrews, and J.K. Dobbins catching the ball and letting Gus Edwards get some early work. I mean, it's an incredible offense. It could be the best of Lamar Jackson's career, and he's already had an MVP season under his belt.
Right.
So we're looking at the best offense he's ever played with, and he's already been better than 95% of the other quarterbacks in their whole career. So just Sammy Watkins is just part of that thing we've been talking about this off season and just getting a piece of these offenses. You don't think about getting a piece of bottom 5, bottom 3 in neutral passing rate, but when it's high value touches, and Sammy Watkins, you were right, 28. He just turned 28 on June 14th. So 28 years old. I don't think the age is any limiting factor for him. It's just that he's always injured. But if he finally gets some injury luck his way, if you want to talk about drum beats, everything you see from the Ravens is Sammy Watkins. They just drafted a wide receiver in the first round, and all you're hearing is Sammy Watkins. So if you can invest in them in Dynasty, I mean, we're always talking about it. Seems like every guy is either worth a first or worth a third. But if you're talking about a contender and you have to send your third in a player, or like your third in Paris Campbell, or something of that sort, like
Right.
a player that's not proven for Sammy Watkins, who you're only betting against injury. I don't know anybody that's just like, no, Sammy Watkins isn't good at football. We all know. I think we all know he's incredible. It's just a matter of if you don't play a full season, you don't get credit for. So
Yeah.
Sammy Watkins is a decent investment at cost for a contending team, especially if you get to throw in that third that is going to be late, plus a player that could be fantastic or could be nothing. Take a player that's getting some buzz. Like, go try to acquire him with someone who's confident in, like mentioned Keelan Cole earlier. He's rising up best ball boards. I mean, people aren't completely out on him because of all the buzz about trying to trade for him for 2 years and looking like the best receiver in camp before Elijah Moore was being Elijah Moore. So just take one of those guys and just try to put just a tiny little package together for Sammy Watkins, and I think he'll help championship runs this year.
Yeah, without a doubt. This was a study I actually did for a piece I wrote for NBC Sports Edge, but it looked at where Lamar Jackson was most efficient at when throwing his pass. I mean, because we already know that from an opportunity standpoint, he's not going to have the most volume in the league, but I don't care about like the high volume touches, especially for a guy that it's going on the back end of rosters. It's just, are they going to be efficient targets? Like similar to the way we looked at Corey Davis like last season, because there's not going to be a ton of targets. Well, in his case, he wound up like garnering like a decent amount of targets, but are they efficient targets? But for Lamar Jackson, he actually had like the most inefficient targets were the ones that were in the intermediate areas of the field. So it's like your out routes, your curl routes, things like that. He had his lowest EPA per target or on those types of targets. But then if you look at some of the short area throws, so like the slants and things of that nature, ticked up a little bit higher in terms of EPA per dropback. And then he was most efficient on the deep ball passes. So like those hits to Marquise Brown. I mean, it was like almost 6 times that like of his efficiency marks, like for some of those other passes. But it's notable that that's where all of the guys that they drafted and the guys they picked up in free agency, Sammy Watkins, like nearly 50% of his targets from Patrick Mahomes last season came in the intermediate areas of the field, like those out routes, those slant routes. I mean, the curl routes rather. I mean, those were the targets that he was getting from Patrick Mahomes. So like those 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7s.
Exactly.
I mean, those are the routes that Sammy wins at. And that's the same thing for Rashad Bateman, same thing for Tylan Wallace, like using some of the numbers that Matt Harmon actually collected for reception perception on for both of those prospects. So it's like, this is a complete overhaul. It's almost like the Ravens did some self-scouting, looked at what Lamar Jackson can do, look at what their current wide receiver roster can't do, and they added the guys that fill in those gaps. And again, so if we're looking at the way that Sammy Watkins can win on the field and where Lamar Jackson needs to help the most, that's where he can wind up actually excelling. And so I don't care about, I mean, if he winds up getting 100 targets or whatever, cool, but are they efficient targets? Are they going to be the targets that are going to wind up continuing to move the ball down the field and make the Baltimore offense the offense that we saw in 2019? And if that's, and for all intents and purposes, for the way that they've drafted and for the way that they've structured their offense, that is entirely possible. So Sammy Watkins is the one that's going to wind up getting most of the pub, well, between him and Bateman at this point. But if Sammy Watkins is getting talked up as a guy that's showing out in camp, then yes, I'll take the cheaper of the two in terms of an option from a good and efficient passing attack, like especially attached to a good quarterback like LJ.
Sure, and you look at it on paper, and I'm not saying that it's one of the best wide receiver groups in the league. It's just, I just want to appreciate the way that they have formed it. I mean, if you looked at those games where Hollywood Brown was productive last season, he wasn't playing his brand of football. He almost had to be used as like that alpha, middle of the field, like technician kind of for those few games where he had like 15, 20 fantasy points. You're like, yeah, Marquise Brown's coming on. No, that was just out of necessity because they had no one. So they had no one to get that done except for making Hollywood Brown do it. So now you have Rashad Bateman who's going to come in and he's going to play that Allen Robinson brand of football. And then you have Sammy Watkins for the underneath stuff, and you have Hollywood going deep. And then, but shame on me for not mentioning Tylan Wallace. I'm glad you brought him up. My goodness. So kudos to the Ravens and kudos to you for tuning in today. We appreciate you checking in with us. Check in on all of our great shows on the Football Guys YouTube network. Please hit that notification bell. So like, subscribe, rate, and review. We appreciate your time. I'm Adam Wilde at APWILDE. He's Chris Allen at Chris Allen FFWX. And we'll catch y'all next time.
Peace.